We've got another major remake today. Our original Salamence video was uploaded May 13th, 2018, so we're long since due to revisit this long-standing competitive titan, especially since in the 9th generation, it was revealed to have a strange, powerful relative from the ancient past, Roaring Moon. We've got a lot to go over, so we're jumping right in and asking, how great were Salamence and Roaring Moon actually? Salamence put that massive base 135 attack stat to great use right away in its debut generation of Advance. Oh sure, the type base physical special categorization meant, like many Pokemon of the era, its strongest option for a certain stat was hidden power, in this case flying, which was only barely stronger than Earthquake against a neutral target. But Salamence was such an all-around excellent Pokemon, it hardly mattered. It was strong, it was fast, and it had useful natural bulk alongside the massively useful Intimidate and excellent typing, providing it a slew of valuable resistances, as well as the flying typing's triumvirate of invaluable immunities like Earthquake, Arena Trap, and Spikes, which also blessed Mence with great longevity. Salamence was even more gifted in the move pool department. In addition to hidden power flying, which was actually quite frightening given the huge attack it was coming off of and the key super effective hits it struck against Celebi and Heracross, as well as neutral hits against its most defining answers, bulky water types, Mence's attack stat was also well equipped with all the coverage it really needed in just 2 other moves, Earthquake to super effectively slam common flying resist like Tyranitar, Metagross, and Jirachi, and Rock Slide to hit Zapdos and Aerodactyl. These got real scary real fast with Choice Band, with which Mence was one of the tier's best wall breakers. Alternatively, if held back to the late game, Salamence would dust weakened teams with Dragon Dance. It was easily fast enough to outrun the entire metagame after a single boost, and with an attack boosting adamant nature to boot. Unlike the already weaker Gyarados, which needed to go even weaker with a speed boosting Jolly nature if it wanted to get the jump on Aerodactyl and Jolteon, and unlike Tyranitar, which even with Jolly can't outrun the much slower Dugtrio. Salamence was so easily able to outrun everything after a boost, it doesn't need to run anywhere near maximum speed investment, leaving it plenty of EVs to bulk itself out, making taking it on in the late game even more perilous. It could go with HP EVs to help it set up intimidated rock slides better, or special defense to help it withstand many of the tier's HP ices and ice punches. As the metagame developed, Dragon Dance Salamence would even drop attack EVs as well to really go all out with special bulk, letting it survive even ice beams. Such sets also tended to experiment with coverage, namely Brick Break, to, after a boost, one-hit KO full health bulky Tyranitar, which would otherwise survive +1 Earthquake. Brick Break also excelled at putting away Blissey, which was an otherwise good check to standard Dragon Dance Salamence. The extra damage was valuable against Snorlax as well. These new Dragon Dance Mence variants could also utilize Refresh to turn Pokemon relying on Toxic or Thunder Wave to check it, like Milotic, bulky Jirachi, and Blissey, into setup fodder. Substitute was also solid to dodge such status, as well as Celebi's Leech Seed, while also foiling would-be explosions from Metagross, Snorlax, and Claydol. On rarer occasions, Salamence can even replace HP Flying and HP Ghost to seal the deal against bulky Gengar, while also grabbing key extra damage against Claydol and Starmie, while maintaining super effective coverage against Celebi. And finally, Salamence could even run Fire Blast as an option for teams without Magneton, which was normally almost a default alongside the set to remove Skarmory. In early Advance, even Choice Band Salamence used Fire Blast when physically defensive Skarmory was standard, though later Specially Defensive Protect Skarmory took over the metagame, which had a much easier time dancing around the move, prompting even Choice Banded Mence to rely on Magneton for Skarmory and replace Fire Blast with the vastly more useful Brick Break. Fire Blast Salamence really came into its own when Salamence began diverging from its near mono physical playstyle in favor of the newly developed mix set. Early Advance saw an all-special attacking set named for its elemental coverage with Dragon Claw, Fire Blast, Hydro Pump, and Hidden Power Grass, but it didn't leave much metagame impact for how easy it was to stop with Blissey and Snorlax. It was more of a fun gimmick. However, eventually Spanish players popularized the set with Brick Break over Hydro Pump, and Mixed Mence was established as a dominant, successful new metagame standard. It was a terror to just about every team without Milotic, which answered everything Salamence could do otherwise anyway. Mixed Mence's incredible coverage and power rendered it an immediate threat to most teams, especially with how easy it switched into battle and with how much less restrictive it was on the team builder. As it was so good into just about everything, it didn't come close to requiring a teammate the way its physical sets demanded Magneton. Mixed Mence also fit on all manner of teams. It first came to widespread prominence as the lifeblood of the newly popular mixed offensive playstyle, but it originated on bulkier balanced teams and would go on to fit on all manner of Spikes teams beautifully. The hazards punishing the many switches around the many super effective hits it threatened. Dragon Claw, beyond being a highly spammable stab move, also made Salamence more immediately potent at threatening Flygon and other Mence. Mixed Mence had plenty variety to its game as well, being flexible enough to be able to drop Hidden Power Grass or more rarely finally, Dragon Claw. With Rock Slide, it threatened the specially defensive Zapdos that would otherwise wall the standard set. Additionally, the Hydro Pump it originally dished was actually excellent. It was arguably the best Claydol lure in the tier, smashing it for huge damage, which was excellent on Spike's team. It also excelled in Salamence's common matchup against Tyranitar. Yes, Brick Break was better against Tyranitar itself, but Hydro Pump was much better against the Pokemon that T-Tar would often switch out to when facing Mence. Hydro Pump would hit a Gengar or Zapdos switch just as hard as Dragon Claw and would absolutely destroy Aerodactyl, which was a common pivot to Mixed Mence. Both these moves were also useful against the increasingly popular Moltres and Charizard. This flexibility extended to non-damaging options as well. Roar was useful to rack up Spike's damage against many of its common checks, while also chasing out all manner of Calm Mind and Dragon Dance boosters. More commonly, Wish was an excellent choice for Salamence to heal itself and its teammates on forced switches. It could even lean into this with Protect if it was willing to be an all-out special attacker with Dragon Claw and Fire Blast as coverage. Wish and Protect actually originated on a very different kind of Salamence. Even Wish alone on Mixed Mence was inspired by the set that introduced the idea to the metagame, what came to be known as Wish Mence, which was a rare and specific but absolutely excellent physical wall. Salamence already had natural utility in soaking up fighting types. Early on, it was renowned as the rarest of things, a consistent Heracross answer, but would also be incredibly useful against the Breloom and Medicham that would become popular later on. It also found itself commonly pivoting around pretty much any physical attacker that wasn't the Intimidate blocking, clear body packing Metagross. It was particularly good at checking itself and Gyarados, but could even check the likes of T-Tar and Aerodactyl in spite of their super effective stab Rock Slide. Well, what if you took this idea to its fullest? That's where the all-out physical bulk investment came in, with the classic combo of Toxic and Flamethrower, the latter chasing out poison immune steel types to make spreading the former quite easy, especially since most Mence answers were vulnerable to it to begin with, which Mence was often as irritating to switch into as it was for the physical attackers it switched into itself. It was particularly stifling against the physical offense teams that Dragon Dance Mence was such a staple of. It was far more specific relative to other Salamence, but similarly effective. Ultimately, Salamence was one of the best, most defining Pokemon in its debut generation of OU, and it also had a slight niche in Ubers. It was completely outclassed by Rayquaza offensively, with its much higher offenses as well as extreme speed, Swords Dance, the sun and rain canceling airlock, significantly higher bulk, and even the extra power of Overheat as fire coverage. However, Wish Mence had a niche on stall teams. Overall, Lugia was a far superior wall, but Mence had a few advantages. The most straightforward were the general pivoting capabilities of Intimidate, as well as the team support of Wish, but similarly crucial was Salamence's lack of a ghost weakness, meaning it wasn't threatened by Choice Band, Deoxys Attack's Shadow Ball the way Lugia was. In fact, Salamence walled most variants of physical Deoxys Attack quite well. This ghost neutrality also extended to letting Salamence reliably switch on the HP Ghost packing Groudon and Rayquaza as well. Additionally, Salamence's bug resist was key for fending off the terrifying Heracross, whose Mega Horn cut through most Uber stables. Finally, with Flamethrower, Salamence was not Spike's bait for opposing Skarmory and Fortress. These advantages over Lugia were certainly nice, but Mence was still incredibly specific, yet a niche it did have, making for a fine addendum to its superb inaugural generation, and now we're moving on to the superior sequel. Salamence became a completely different Pokemon in Generation 4, wielding the most significant, powerful new tools to unleash the full extent of the crushing strength its stats suggested, an ultimate one-hit KO machine. Sure, it was Stealth Rock weak, but rocks also dug into the opposition and made taking Mence's hits even more difficult, so this was small comfort. The rock's weakness was a worthwhile price to pay considering Mence was packing the defining attack of the generation, Stab Draco Meteor, at its original 140 base power and only Steel type to resist it, with the Fairy's type still a ways away from existing. Salamence's Draco dropping would be assisted by Gen 4's other major power boosters, Life Orb and Choice Specs. Specs Mence was actually quite a terror for any team without a Blissey, but though the recoil could be a pain, it was Mixed Mence that established itself as the standard, utterly destroying stall teams, even those with Cresselia, with the help of Sandstorm. It was a testament to how destructive it was to absolutely everything with Draco Meteor, Fire Blast, and Brick Break that players were willing to put up with the constant buffet of passive damage from Stealth Rock, Life Orb, and Sand through another new tool of Salamence's Roost. Roost filled out the last slot nicely to offset passive damage on predicted switches. Physical Mence was also newly excellent, as the new physical special split meant it could now use Dragon Claw as its physical stab move, making its Dragon Dance set newly powerful, especially with the power jump of Life Orb. In addition to its brutal, immense offensive bombardment, Salamence's Intimidate-driven natural defensive utility was again valuable to help combat this new wave of power, like Close Combat, that other new attack taking over the game that Mence so happened to resist. It helped dance around the star of early Diamond and Pearl, Heracross, and then Swords Dance Lucario that wound up usurping Heracross. Then Platinum came around, blessed Salamence with Outrage, and really launched it into mega stardom. Now packing the best Dragon Stab, both specially and physically, with the power power and speed to match. It became the single most dangerous Pokemon in the metagame. Outrage Mence was arguably the biggest change of the Platinum era, right up there with Rotom A and Bullet Punch Scizor. The latter was actually the go-to revenge killer for the newly devastating Dragon Dance Mence, which was now the tier's premier endgame threat with Outrage's face-melting power to complement how difficult it was to safely outspeed with other choice Scarfers. It outran popular Scarfers in Heatran and Rotom A, and speed tied with its fellow base 100s, the otherwise reliable Jirachi and Flygon. The only consistently good Scarfer that outsped it was Latias, which was famously easy to pursuit trap, if not with Scizor then Tyranitar. Scizor was as consistent a revenge killer as you got, since Salamence's Ice Shard weakness could only be exploited if you ran one of the notoriously unreliable Ice Shard users, and since Scizor was the #1 Pokemon in usage that was tasked with checking everything, this was very easily exploited. Salamence, or a teammate like Gengar, often baited Scizor into bullet punching, so Salamence's teammate Magnezone could trap it, leaving Mence free to go lights out in the late game. Magnezone of course also dealt with Skarmory, as well as the new addition Bronzong, meaning Salamence didn't have to run Fire Blast in the last slot and could instead roost off Stealth Rock damage. Mixed Mence thrived with Outrage as well. Old Mixed Mence, as the Draco Meteor Fire Blast Brick Break Roost set was retroactively named, continued to excel since Roost helped play around the stall teams that it was meant to terrorize by shrugging off passive damage and thus ruining their attempts to play around Mence by switching around its attacks until it fainted from its own life orb. But increasingly more popular was the so-called new Mixed Mence, which eventually took over completely, opting in favor of a new strategy, unleashing the ultimate Dragon Onslaught, running Draco Meteor, Fire Blast, Earthquake, and Outrage. Who cares if your Draco Meteor brings you to -2 special attack when you can just unleash your other unweakened Dragon Stab right after? It was genuinely unwallable. Even if you ran Cresselia, which was generally unadvisable at this point, you would still likely succumb to the 1-2 of Draco Outrage with Stealth Rock and Sand in play. No Steel type was safe from Mence's coverage options either, to say nothing of the fact that many of them tended to take heavy damage from the Dragon moves despite resisting them simply because of how strong they were. Dragon Dance and Mix were the two standards, but in classic Salamence fashion, there were plenty of options. You could even combine the two into Mixed Dragon Dance Mence, because why shouldn't Dragon Dance Mence also get in on the Draco bombing fun? Early game, you'd function just like a Mixed Mence, threatening physically bulky checks to the Dragon Dancer with Meteor and Fire Blast. If you were able to stick around until late game, you had the option to lethally surprise your opponent with Dragon Dance. Alternatively, you could go with a bulky Dragon Dance Mence, as Scizor's Bullet Punch bounced right off the physically invested variant, but even a specially defensive Dragon Dance Mence was effective to withstand and roost off various ice moves. These were generally preferred to the previous generation's Wish Mence, though that was a fun occasional gimmick. Still though, you didn't need to surprise the opponent to destroy them with Salamence, though there was an innate uncertainty to face it, since you didn't know whether it was Mix or Dragon Dance when it came in, and the answers to both were as different as they were barely sufficient. As the best Pokemon in OU, Salamence's constant barrage of Dragon power warped the metagame around it, controversially so, especially as it had other excellent dragons to pair up with. You might withstand the strength of one dragon, but would you withstand the strength of multiple? Probably not. The Dragons metagame was in full swing, with jokes about teams consisting of 3 dragons and 3 steels. You have your dragon offense, and then the attempts to withstand that dragon offense, except they weren't really jokes, as there were quite a few successful teams that adhered to that format, and many more that came very close. Mence and its fellow base 110 special attack Draco spammer Latias were the primary terrors, and both were discussed as potentially being too powerful for the way they warped the metagame. Latias wound up banned, though some thought Salamence was the real issue. The core problem came from the reason it was called Guess Mence. That uncertainty factor about guessing Mix versus Dragon Dance was proving increasingly dangerous. Even if you guessed correctly, Salamence was still tremendously difficult to actually answer. Best case, you took a lot of damage from even a resisted Draco Meteor. Worst case, Dragon Dance just swept you clean. Everything in between these two was overwhelming as well, especially since, in spite of its obvious, seemingly easy to exploit weak points, Salamence was just so consistent at destroying everything through raw power. After many months of debate, Salamence was eventually put up for a discussion and wound up banned by the first ever Smoking Council, receiving 8 ban votes and just 1 to not ban. The metagame flourished in its absence, demonstrating just how much of a chokehold Salamence had on it. Years down the line, there was talk of Mence being reintroduced, especially since Latias wound up returning, but ultimately, it was deemed too powerful for the tier, especially because it was too fast for how strong it was. Its replacement, Dragonite, was immensely strong, but much easier to keep in check for both Mix and DD sets for its much lower speed. In Uber, Salamence was again just about entirely outclassed by Rayquaza, but there were some niche uses of Salamence pairing with Ray and Wobbuffet, the latter of which could find setup opportunities through Encore to allow for an overwhelming Dragon Dance duel. There were generally more reliable Dragon pairings in Uber, but it was a nice little niche for those who really wanted to use their beloved Mence. Ultimately though, Salamence had an incredible sophomore generation. The beginning of VGC was also the beginning of a long-lasting career of VGC excellence for Salamence. Salamence's combination of favorable traits allowed it to thrive in a fast-paced doubles environment due to the sheer amount of value it could bring for the team. On the defensive side, its ability Intimidate allowed Salamence to support its team by mitigating physical damage its teammates would have to face, while offensively, Salamence was the one Intimidate Pokemon that didn't care if it was facing other Intimidate users due to its special attacking prowess, packing not only great coverage moves, but also an extremely dangerous pre-nerf Draco Meteor. To make things worse, Salamence could also threaten to be a physical variant that carried Dragon Dance, attempting to boost alongside a fake-out user in order to end the game swiftly. Salamence players also experimented with several mix sets throughout the 2009 VGC format. Mixed attacking Pokemon were actually dangerous during 2009 VGC because of the item switch clause that was allowed during the competition years. Players could swap items around the party in between matches during a set, so a Life Orb Salamence could potentially be holding a choice item the next game, making it a top-tier threat due to its overwhelming strength and unpredictability. Mixed Salamence sets frequently carried coverage moves tailored towards supporting its team like Heat Wave, Hydro Pump, Brick Break, amongst many other tricks in Salamence's arsenal. These incredible characteristics allowed Salamence to win the VGC 2009 World Championships by the hand of Kazuyuki Tsuji, who utilized Salamence in an incredibly brilliant anti-meta team composed of Ludicolo, Toxicroak, Metagross, Snorlax, Empoleon, and Mence. Tsuji's team had an incredibly favorable matchup against rain teams that terrorized any opposition by leveraging its own rain strategy, alongside fake-out support and powerful explosion users. The key player on the team was Kazuyuki's Salamence set, which utilized Draco Meteor, Heat Wave, Protect, and Rain Dance. Kazuyuki's Mence was a fast and speedy set that aimed to win Weather Wars against non-rain teams through its brilliant use of Rain Dance to enable Ludicolo's shenanigans, while simultaneously blasting through potential threats with Draco Meteor. This team was truly a work of art that utilized Salamence to its fullest, letting it earn its first of many more to come World Championships. Many Pokemon that can compete at the highest level perform well, even in metagames where power creep is raised dramatically. This, however, wasn't the case for Salamence, as it struggled to find its place in the metagame. Sure, it was an intimidating dragon type that outsped Rayquaza, but Rayquaza wasn't as popular of a choice in VGC as it was in the singles Ubers metagame, which greatly maimed Salamence's potential to find a role in the meta. Players instead elected to bring Palkia or Dialga on their teams as powerful Draco Meteor users that could threaten or team up with the two most dominant Pokemon in the metagame, Groudon and Kyogre. By the time VGC 2010 World Championships happened, Salamence was nowhere to be seen, and just like the Philadelphia Eagles in 2026, it had a sad ending for a former champion. Despite the plethora of dragon competition, Latios, Garchomp, Haxorus, Hydreigon, Dragonite now with Multiscale, Salamence was still excellent in Black and White 1. Memories of mixed Mence persisted, and it was still threatening against the slew of bulky Spikes teams populating the early metagame. Non-steals were still melted by Draco Meteor, and Ferrothorn's Dragon Resist wasn't of much use when it was terrified of getting destroyed by Fire Blast. Additionally, Intimidate was again valuable extra utility to slow down the slew of huge physical threats running around. Even if Salamence itself wasn't going to beat Terrakion, Landorus, or Excadrill, simply landing an Intimidate on them could be what it took to prevent these game enders from running you over. Mixed Mence was actually best alongside Excadrill, appreciating its rapid spin support, and so found a home on bulky Spike's sand balances itself, especially valuable for how it provided an advantage against other such teams. Eventually, once Sandrush Excadrill was banned for terrorizing the entire metagame and could thus no longer support Salamence's Stealth Rock weakness, the meta began calming down so as to not quite need Intimidate as much, as players looking for a mixed attacking dragon shifted over to Hydreigon, which was less defensively valuable and a tad slower, but was far more powerful and neutral to Stealth Rock. However, Salamence was far from being completely displaced, as it still had plenty to use that couldn't be replicated in the form of its new Dream World ability, Moxie. Now that Sandrush Excadrill wasn't around to invalidate Choice Scarfers or cut Dragon Dancer sweeps short, Salamence could pair both sets with Moxie, boosting attack upon grabbing a KO to etch out a place as a uniquely dangerous late game threat. In Black and White 1, Salamence couldn't use Dragon Dance and Outrage on the same set as Moxie, so Dragon Dance sets had to use Dragon Claw. But with Dragon Gem, it would get the push it needed for that first KO, and then the Moxie boost kicked in to finish off the rest. The set that really took off though was Choice Scarf, which could use Outrage and Moxie, and required no setup. It just came in against weakened teams and started attacking, the Moxie boost letting it clean up something fierce. The fact that it was also a fine check to Volcarona was appreciated as well. Scarf Mence became a metagame staple, a fixture on the most popular, dominant dominant offense teams. It was especially strong on Deoxys defense-led spike stacking squads, since the extra hazard support put opponents in a lose-lose position, unable to try and pivot around Mence's attacks, though it was also an essential part of Azelf-led hyper offense and was effective on various sand offense teams as well. Black and White 2 came and piled on more dragons with the return of Garchomp and the introduction of Kieran Black. Far be it from competing with Mence though. If anything, these dragons made Salamance's job easier, since together they would overwhelm the opponent with unstoppable dragon power. Salamence didn't need them either. It continued to function quite well on more standard offense scenes as it had before. It also had a few flashes of surprise excellence with the choice spec set that completely obliterated the physical walls that would take on its usual scarf sets, though this was more of a one-off gimmick. It was the eventual solidifying of Dragmag as a legitimate style that really demonstrated Salamence's talents though. Named for the combination of dragons and Magnezone, Dragmag seemed simple, but each dragon had to bring something unique to the table, which is why Salamence was such a strong fit on these teams. Being a Scarfer that could actually boost his attack was an excellent, unique trait. Salamence made up for the fact that it was slower than Scarf Garchomp by actually hitting harder, and it still hit a highly valuable speed tier in that its base 100 speed let it jet past the popular Scarf Landorus Therian. These same traits allowed Salamence to unleash its Dragon Dance set on certain such teams as well. It was especially excellent at taking advantage of opponents that expected Scarf. If you protected against it with your Heatran, for example, you were in a world of trouble. And now that it could run both Dragon Dance Outrage and Moxie on the same set, it really had no problem melting whatever stood in its path with a +1 Dragon Gem Outrage. Plus, it didn't need to lock into Outrage against weaker targets, as it also ran Dragon Claw as its 4th move, making it much more difficult to force into an Outrage that would eventually cause confusion, as was many weakened teams' last desperate attempt against it. Even if Salamence didn't sweep itself, the damage it left in its wake set things up beautifully for its partner Scarf Chomp to finish the job. The Gem ban threw a wrench in this, but Dragon Dance Salamence was still an effective sweeper with Lumberry to shrug off Outrage's confusion, and Scarf Mence was as consistent as always, unique as a cleaner, and especially good against the Volcarona-centered hyper offense teams that came to dominate the metagame. All in all, though Salamence wasn't as much of a star as it had been before, it was still an excellent, consistently successful Pokemon. After missing out on a year of competition due to the regional format employed in VGC 2011, Salamence made its appearance in the Unova region, and it did so in blazing fashion. Although much of its sets remained remarkably similar to the ones it had employed back in Gen 4, it did get a couple new toys to play with. For one, the new Type Gems allowed Salamence to delete anything standing in its path with Draco Meteor, a move which was already devastating before the boost. Secondly, although it wasn't quite new, many Salamence players started experimenting with more supportive options like Tailwind, which let Salamence's teammate invest way more in bulk and still outspeed after Tailwind was set in motion. In conjunction with its impressive bulk and Intimidate, bulky Salamence was now an alternative to all-out offense. There is a reason, however, that all-out offense Salamence is the staple. Like a great boxer once said, everyone has a plan until they get hit. And Draco Meteors was scoring KOs everywhere throughout VGC 2012. KOs were also good if players wanted to rock Salamence's new hidden ability and final new toy in Moxie, but Intimidate was vastly preferred because of its great supporting capability. Salamence's classic offensive set backed by Dragon Gem allowed Randy Quaw to place 6th at the Canadian Nationals, using a powerful rain team of Politoed, Ludicolo, Metagross, Gastrodon, Volcarona, and Salamence. Randy Quaw improved upon the Rain Mence strategy that had worked wonderfully in previous years and added several quality of life improvements to the team. For one, the appearance of a non-restricted Drizzle user cleared up a slot in Salamence's move pool. Randy utilized Draco Meteor, Heat Wave, Protect, and Dragon Pulse to have a consistent damage option in case it was necessary. This Salamence set showed how devastating Dragon Gem Draco Meteor could really be, popularizing it for the rest of the format. By the time Worlds came by, Salamence succeeded one more time and earned 2 of the top 8 slots at the tournament, with an 8th place finish by Junpei Yamamoto and a 4th place finish by Joe Pokolsky. While Pokolsky used a variant of Dragon Gem Draco Mence that used Substitute for setup rather than an extra Dragon Stab, Yamamoto's Salamence aimed to overwhelm opponents through the power of Draco Meteor or the terror of many a VGC player, Rock Slide flinching. Both Salamence players enjoyed great success by pairing Salamence with a Sand Core of Tyranitar, Rotom, Crest, and either of Garchomp and Gastrodon for its choice of a ground type, and Metagross or Estradrill for a steel type. Once again, Salamence enjoyed great success in VGC, but an ominous feeling was looming around the corner. The ominous feeling was indeed a nightmare coming from the dream world, as Landorus Therian transformed VGC as a whole. Landorus's presence extinguished the flame of hope burning inside Salamence's heart, as it was superior to Salamence in almost every capacity in its ability to support its teammates as a powerful flying type and Intimidate user. Additionally, Salamence was also outclassed in the offensive department by a fellow Gen 3 dragon type in the form of Latios. Latios was not only a faster option, but also a stronger one in the specially offensive department. The presence of these two Pokemon warped the 2013 format and made Salamence retreat back to a small corner in the shadow of Meteor Falls once more in its VGC history. This time, however, players attempted to make it work and landed at some placings. Salamence's best performance was an 8th place finish by Daniel Nolan and Matthias Sutrodolski at the UK Nationals, while Sutrodolski himself managed to get a 16th place finish at Italy Nationals, and Giovanni Neda got a 19th place finish at the US Nationals. By the time Worlds came by though, Salamence was once again nowhere to be seen. The things that made Salamence good were just done better by others, and once more, being a Salamence fan was rough. Salamence was completely passed over in XY. Dragons weren't completely useless with the introduction of fairy types, but the competition had much greater use against both the fairy types themselves and the metagame that had developed around them. If you wanted a dragon flying type, Dragonite's multiscale and extreme speed were more useful tools. However, strangely, Salamence didn't drop to UU during this time. It was probably its status as a fan favorite inflating its usage, because it certainly wasn't its viability. It wasn't until Oraz that Salamence would fall out of OU for the first time, base Salamence that is, because Oraz also blessed it with one of the most incredible Mega Evolutions, not just by OU standards, but even Ubers. Megamence was swiftly banned from OU, dominating everything around it in ludicrous fashion, for the incredible, verging on ridiculous all-around perfection of its design. It wasn't just a staggering buff to its stats, though that was of course a major part of it. Both attacking stats got a small yet appreciated boost, especially attack, which was now at a monstrous base 145. The first really major buff though was how it jumped to a staggering base 120 speed, Alakazam's famous benchmark that put it ahead of the vast majority of viable Pokemon. But unlike Alakazam, Megamence was actually quite tanky. In addition to receiving a small yet appreciated buff to its special defense, bringing it up to base 90, its second major buff was how it became a bona fide physical tank with a massive defense stat of base 130. In conjunction with the Intimidate and Get Off before Mega Evolving, it could set up on basically anything physical, but even after Mega Evolving, it was a great hit taker. Speaking of which, the fact that it no longer intimidated after Mega Evolving was part of its final significant buff, the one that really made it extraordinary. Its new ability was Aerolate. Forget focusing on Dragon Stab in the age of Fairy type. Now, Megamence was first and foremost a flying type attacker, and an incredibly powerful one at that, because not only did Aerolate turn its normal moves flying, it also gave them a power boost equivalent to that of a Life Orb. Megamence immediately came to dominate Ubers as the number 2 Pokemon, right behind Primal Groudon. It set up and swept with such ridiculous ease, on par with, if not eclipsing XY's defining sweeper, Xerneas. Even though you prepared for it, it would regularly just beat you through sheer speed and strength, to say nothing of how the slightest change to its moveset could be utterly ruinous. Flying Stab was so good, it used 2 of them alongside Dragon Dance and Roost. The primary one was Double Edge or Return, but you couldn't even thwart it with a burn as you would most physical attackers, because that would activate its second, even stronger stab, Facade. It could also swap Facade out for Earthquake's coverage to clock Klefki, as well as other flying resists like Arceus Rock and Tyranitar, or it could use Refresh to shrug off burns and the ruinous speed drop of Paralysis. Whatever option it went with, Megamence was constantly tremendously threatening to every team. There was a time where its overwhelming effect on the metagame was such that the player base briefly talked about banning it and Primal Groudon. Nothing came of this, but they were very irritated with how much more dominant the two were relative to the rest of the tier. Even though Megamence would eventually find this number 2 slot challenged by Xerneas, it was still never anything less than top 3. Not counting Rayquaza, what else? Salamence was the single best Mega of the 6th generation. That's right, better than Gengar, better than both Mewtwo's. Mega Gengar at least came close, but Megamence was the most powerful and popular Mega in Ubers. While Mega Salamence was ripping up Ubers after having gotten banned from OU in a heartbeat, base Salamence was having a similarly impressive showing in UU. Fairy types existed in underuse as well, but Florges and Sylveon were terrified of Iron Tail from both Salamence's best, most common sets, which were once again the Dragon Dancer and the Mixed variant. Despite the inclusion of Iron Tail necessitating some coverage issues, Dragon Dance Mence was as game-ending as ever, while Mixed Mence, despite its Draco meter having been weakened to 130 base power, was no less instantaneous nor effective in the destruction it wrought. Both sets also benefited from the indirect advantage that was the good old Guess Mence conundrum. In classic Salamence style, you didn't know which set it was, which made the already difficult task of withstanding its hits even more of a problem. You try to check the Dragon Dancer with Swampert, only to be dusted by Draco meter from the Mixed set, or the Dragon Dancer would just overwhelm you with sheer power. Mence wasn't an instant suspect, but as the generation progressed, the ease with which it crushed so much of the metagame became of increasing concern to the player base. It may have had to deal with fairy types and a weaker Draco meter, but Salamence was indeed still an absolute behemoth and wound up getting banned from UU, capping off an absolutely superb 6th generation for singles. A new generation once again brought a new realm of opportunity for Salamence, where it could once again try to prove its mettle on the big stage of VGC. Although its trusty Dragon Gem had vanished like a Marvel superhero in 2018, and Salamence didn't really get anything added to its arsenal, the limited pool of Pokemon available in the 2014 VGC format made Salamence a top-tier pick for many of the same reasons it had been in the previous years, utilizing mostly the same sets it had previously succeeded with in other generations, like Bulky, Tailwind, Mix Attacker, Choice User, or Drop a Draco. Salamence quickly became one of the metagame staples, even in the face of Mega Evolving Pokemon. Its role as an Intimidate user was key, as Intimidation was necessary in order to face the explosive threat of Mega Evolution users like Kangaskhan, Lucario, and Mawile, while its typing played favorably against many other popular Megas like the Kanto starters. Salamence's first big appearance was at the 2014 German Nationals, where Marcus Hamon took the glory with a first-place finish. Matthias Suchodolski, Zacharias Dom, and Sismon Wasdat placed 4th, 6th, and 8th at the same event respectively. Hamon opted to utilize a Choice Scarf variant of Salamence that worked beautifully in conjunction with Mega Kangaskhan and Mega Mawile. Marcus's team also leveraged Garchomp's offensive prowess through an Earthquake that Salamence happily ignored, and spread burn everywhere, with Gengar and Rotom Heat mitigating physical damage through Will-O-Wisp. Later that year, Miguel Marte Della Torre would place 2nd at the UK Nationals, while Simon Yip and Gavin Michaels would get 6th and 8th place at the US Nationals respectively. Nathan Ferrugia also managed to get a 7th place finish at the Australian Regionals, as Salamence was simultaneously one of the best supporting Pokemon in the metagame, while simultaneously leveraging its offense, becoming a true staple of the 2014 metagame. Worlds, however, would end in a disappointment, as Salamence would not secure a win on the big stage once more, with Blake Hopper, Inoshikar, and Marcus Hamon placing 11th, 12th, and 14th respectively. While it was a strong Pokemon throughout the year, it couldn't clutch it in the end. Pokédex entries state that while a Bagon is growing up, it wishes tremendously to acquire the ability to fly, even throwing itself off cliffs in order to practice its non-existent flight. So what happens when Salamence wishes it could fly even better than before? Mega Evolution. The arrival of Omega Ruby and Alpha Sapphire marked a new beginning for Salamence players. With Mega Evolution came several new desirable threats, like its brand new ability Aerolate. Aerolate gave Salamence the opportunity to use something it had only dreamed of in previous years: Flying Stab. Previously resorting to the lackluster hidden power Flying, Mega Salamence could now spread around stab damage in the form of all of its powerful normal turn flying moves, Double Edge, Frustration, and Return, as these are all beautiful new toys that it could play with on the physical side, while its special attacking variant absolutely loved the stab spread damage in the form of Hyper Voice. This Mega Evolution was everything Salamence had ever dreamed of and more. Mega Salamence became considerably bulkier than regular Salamence, which made it an even better Tailwind user than before. Megamence was also really fast, leaving most of the metagame behind without investing much in speed, allowing it to take on a lot of hits in conjunction with its pre-Mega Intimidate. Once again though, offense was its trademark, and many players chose to max out on its speed and offensive stats in order to dish out fast and powerful damage in the form of Draco Meteor and its Flying Onslaught. Needless to say, Mega Salamence won, and it won a lot. It had so many top placements, in fact, that it earned the distinction of the FSG writing team having to limit the mentions to top 3 placements only, something only Incineroar and Thundurus have ever managed. Mega Salamence earned a 1st place and 2nd place finish at the Perth Regional in the hands of Mustafa Olomi and Gabriel Voon respectively, and then won the Adelaide Regionals piloted by Nihal Noor. Arash Ahmadi then took Megamence to a 2nd place finish at the UK Nationals, and Salamence won Australian Nationals, being a key component of Matthew Rowe's team, while Jackson Lakey got 3rd at the same event. Finally, Miguel Marti Della Torre earned the 3rd place finish at the Italy Nationals. Mega Salamence seemed poised to take the glory at the 2015 World Championships, and so it got 9th? That's right, the highest place in Mega Salamence got at Worlds was 9th place in the hands of Gennaro Vallejo. For all of its accolades and broken offensive and defensive utility, Mega Salamence alone was not enough to face the revolutionary chalk strategy that dominated Japan and Worlds that year. This time, power alone was not enough for Mega Salamence to earn the coveted World Championship that it once held. The 2016 metagame was the first restricted metagame to show up since 2010, and it did so with a bang. Restricted metagames are famous for introducing an insane amount of power creep into the mix, but 2016 raised the bar tremendously. For one, the previous restricted Kings of Kyogre and Groudon had only gotten better by achieving Primal Reversion, which wasn't a form of Mega Evolution, thus allowing players to bring them and a Mega Evolving Pokemon. The 3rd member of the trio, Rayquaza, achieved its own form of Illumination by eating a rock in space, allowing it to attain Mega Evolution without without necessitating a Mega Stone as a held item. All three of these Pokemon were insanely powerful, with Mega Rayquaza being considered by many to be the strongest Pokemon of all time. So how did Mega Salamence fare this time around, considering it had previously struggled in power crept metagames? Well, it performed better than it had ever done previously. Although not much was changing, Mega Salamence's ability to intimidate became invaluable in supporting Primal Groudon and Kyogre in their eternal plight against Mega Rayquaza. Mega Salamence was also faster than Mega Rayquaza, so it could serve as an answer to it, making it a staple in a huge majority of VGC 2016 teams. Finally, Mega Salamence's ability to set up Tailwind allowed both Kyogre and Groudon to exploit their highly destructive spread moves to great effect, sometimes ending the match on the spot if the Tailwind went through. Mega Salamence also hit tremendously hard, and its Dragon Flying stabs meant that nothing was going to like standing in front of it, restricted or not. In VGC 2015, Mega Salamence struggled to face top threats alone, but this wasn't the case in 2016. Mega Salamence found its best friend forever in Primal Groudon, who melted any steel type trying to stand in Mega Salamence's way, while Mega Salamence provided speed control and intimidation against opposing ground types that Groudon disliked facing. The pair was usually rounded out with a third weapon of mass destruction in the form of Xerneas, who also greatly enjoyed the non-existence of steel types in Groudon's path. This team dominated. Here are some of its accolades. This time it would surely win Worlds though, right? Well, it was once again an utterly dominant Pokemon that won countless times, and this time it had a Pippin to its Jordan and Primal Groudon. So how did it do? Well, it got really close. Aaron Traylor earned the 5th place finish, and Justin Karras placed 6th with Mega Salamence respectively. So what gives? Worlds tends to be a tournament where players bring out new tricks in order to prepare for patterns and team compositions that have succeeded throughout the season, and the Mence Groudon Xerneas lineup was the team to beat. 7 out of 8 teams in the top 8 brought Bronzong, which was the one steel type that the Mence Groudon Xerneas shell could not beat cleanly, while 4 out of 8 teams in the top 8 brought a wide guard Hitmontop that shut down much of the spread damage that the Xerneas Groudon Mence shell was comfortable in dishing out. These supporting Pokemon allowed Primal Groudon and Mega Ray to take home the glory in the end. Much like the lives of many internet celebrities, Mega Mence's time in the spotlight ended up becoming its own downfall. Sun and Moon Z moves unlocked all sorts of possibilities for many an offensive threat, and Salamence was among them. It was similar to Dragonite and Gyarados in that they were Dragon Dancers suddenly blessed with amazing physical flying stab, since with Flynium Z, they could use Fly or Bounce in Gyarados' case and have the 2-turn effect bypass as they unleashed Supersonic Sky Strike. Gyarados and Dragonite were preferred in OU, Gyarados for its secondary Water Stab, and Dragonite for multiscale. So Salamence returned to UU, only to get hurried right back out. It got quick banned instantly. There was no way UU could handle a Dragon Dance Mence that could unleash such powerful flying stab even if only once. Since then the KO would be achieved, the Moxie Boost would kick in, and that be it. Salamence didn't see usage in OU, but that was fine. It did technically have the slightest of niches with its Dragon Dance set, but it was really just for specialists who like finding viability in any Pokemon, however small. However, base Salamence's Gen 7 legacy was really about its immediate ban from UU. Meanwhile, Mega Mence was reeling from a nerf. Whereas Aerolate had previously boosted its normal turn flying moves by 30%, the equivalent of Life Orb, it would now only do so by 20%. Still, having the built-in equivalent of the Sharp Beak item was nothing to take lightly, and indeed Mega Mence once again crushed Ubers in much of the same way it had in Oras. It wasn't as all-consumingly dominant as before, but this was less a result of the nerf. After all, you didn't resist flying, you were still taking heavy damage from it, and more a result of generalized power creep, such as physically defensive Zygarde Complete and the incredibly tanky, flying resistant Magearna and Cub Ultra Sun and Moon Necrozma Duskmane. There weren't problems that Mega Mence couldn't handle though. Just because the tier didn't collapse to its attacks easily, now didn't mean it was suddenly a cinch to deal with. Even if you could take its hits, you had to successfully take it out in return, and given its superb bulk that let it switch in and Dragonette so easily to begin with, this wasn't an easy task. Mega Mence required a bit more precision to be used successfully this time around, but this was a minor price to pay, as it was an excellent, massively threatening Pokemon once again, concluding another superb generation for Salamence overall. A new generation and a new regional format once again meant that Salamence did not need to contend with as many power crept Pokemon, and once again it performed stellarly. The new Z-move mechanic introduced in Generation 7 gave Salamence an extreme power boost that it had sorely missed since the absence of Dragon Gem all the way back in Generation 5. Flynium Z in particular let Salamence wield a powerful flying stab in the form of Supersonic Sky Strike, once again unlocking its potential as a mix attacker through its devastating flying Dragon Stab combination. The other destruction that Supersonic Sky Strike could unleash allowed Salamence to perform as one of the premier Pokemon even in a metagame riddled with fairy types on every team, as the Tapus were ubiquitous in VGC 2017. Flynium Z was the go-to set for Salamence, with players utilizing a combination of Protect, Dragonance, Fly, and either a Dragon move or Earthquake for coverage. Despite Flynium Z's popularity, many players also experimented with a bulky Assault Vest set that utilized Bulldoze and Dragon Tail as a form of speed control that could also deal with the popular Trick Room strategy. Salamence's top-notch Intimidate support and an intimidating offensive presence made it a staple of competitive Pokemon once more, and allowed it to obtain several top placements throughout the season. Even after the loss of its Mega, Salamence dominated the 2017 format, but again it just came short of winning the World Championships. Paul Ruiz got an amazing 3rd place finish utilizing the Flynium Z variant, while Tomoyuki Yoshimura preferred the bulkier speed control, landing a very respectable 4th place finish. With the National Dex and Mega Evolution available, Mega Salamence was finally free to wreak havoc, and this time around, it was going to be really hard to stop it, emulating much of the success that the Mence Groudon Xerneas core had obtained in the 2016 metagame. Mega Salamence formed a great partnership with Tapu Koko and several ground types in the format like Gastrodon, Excadrill, Landorus T, and even Rhyperior. The ground types would deal with the pesky poison and steel types that Mega Salamence and Tapu Koko did not enjoy fighting, while Tapu Koko would get rid of bulky waters and dragon types that could stand in Mega Mence's path. Mega Mence would return the favor by absolutely deleting any grass type that stood in its partner's way. The strategy dominated throughout the season, and thanks to hidden ability buffs, it even gained a new ally that took Mega Salamence's defensive capability to new extremes: Incineroar. The double Intimidate strategy that became popular with the Mence Incineroar duel rocked the format and became a staple of competitive Pokemon at large for years to come. In VGC 2018, Mega Salamence was doing the same thing it had always done: utilize its arrow-lated stabs next to its Draco Meteors, bring forth Tailwind, and threaten with Dragon Dance. It wasn't trying to reinvent the wheel, it was driving the car. Mega Salamence was putting up prime LeBron numbers and showed up almost everywhere in events. Here are all the top 3 placings. Once again, it was finally time for Worlds. Salamence had been so close so many times, but this time around it managed to not only get a 4th place finish in the hands of Yusei Matsuno, but to get its 2nd World Championship title being piloted by Paul Ruiz. Paul Ruiz used the Koko Mega Mence Gastrodon strategy to full effect, releasing a barrage of powerful offense alongside the extremely powerful 50% Berry Snorlax, and had Kartana and Incineroar in the back lines for support. The team was deceptively bulky and managed to put out consistent damage to overwhelm opponents that couldn't keep up with the pace. Paul Ruiz went with a mono-attacking variant of Mega Mence that used Roost in order to stay around for as much as possible, ignoring much of the recoil damage from Double Edge. Salamence's 2nd historic World Championship came by in a tournament full of excitement and hard reads that played to its strengths as a Pokemon beautifully. With the VGC 2019 format came the answer to the question: if Mega Salamence Xerneas Primal Groudon was so good, why isn't there a Mega Salamence Xerneas Primal Groudon 2? The nearly unstoppable shell from 2016 again ruled the format and became incredibly dominant, being present in almost every top placing at every event with ludicrous amounts of success. In 2016, the team had been stopped by Bronzong, but this time around, a certain Heel Cat had joined the fray. Incineroar's presence turned an already dominant shell into a strategy so powerful it can only be compared to the utter dominance of Chalk in 2015. The team was incredibly bulky, seemingly had an answer for anything and everything, and it put opposing players on a timer before Xerneas, Mega Mence, or Primal Groudon set up shop and swept the entire team. The worst part, it managed to do this with only 4 Pokemon. The other 2 could be basically anything a player wanted. Many players quickly found that Misty Terrain was a welcome addition to protect Groudon and Xerneas from status moves, and Feeny quickly joined most of the teams that rocked this shell. Tapu Lele was also decently popular, spectacular as its ability to stop priority moves was helpful in the mirror match, and Scarf Lele was a big threat to opposing Megaments and a possible answer to Xerneas. The team was everywhere, and again, its placings are just too much to count. Throughout the format, Megaments rocked its trusty Tailwind Aerolate set that had become its trademark throughout the years and put it to great use once more. An old adage in the fighting game community is, if it works, keep doing it, as Salamence put this arcane knowledge to great effect. So after a full season of dominance, Megaments and its all-star lineup of teammates was ready to defend its title as world champion, and it did so in spectacular fashion. Naoto Mizubuchi won the 2019 World Championships with a team consisting of Megaments, Primal Groudon, Incineroar, Tapu Fini, Stakataka, and Lunala, forgoing the presence of Xerneas in favor of the Trick Room blessings and bulk that Lunala provided. This adaptation was just what Mizubuchi needed to dominate the mirror match against opposing Groudon, Mence, Xerneas, and Incineroar shells. Lunala's inability to be faked out and added bulk with Shadow Shield meant that it could accrue the advantage necessary to take home the W when facing similar teams. This theory proved to be true when facing second place finisher Hiroformi Kimura, who also brought Megaments and Groudon, but chose to bring Umbreon and Necrozma DM as the metagame adaptations for the Worlds format. 2019 was a masterclass on metagame evolution and another year of glory for Mega Salamence. No more Mega, no more Z moves, no more Salamence getting banned from UU. That wasn't to say it was a bad Pokemon though. It was very, very good, one of the best in the tier. And what's more, it was so good in a brand new way, a major departure from its old playstyle. Yes, it could still Dragon Dance, but its defining set was something new, an offensive defensive special attacker loaded with utility and power alike. This was courtesy of several new tools. First, heavy duty boots meant it was no longer concerned with Stealth Rock, which let it get a ton of mileage out of Intimidate and generally switch in easily. Second, it now had real Flying Stab and Hurricane, giving it an incredibly spammable move unperturbed by Fairy type switching in, while also providing crucial super effective coverage against key targets like Amoonguss and Zarude. Salamence also threatened the tier's flying resist handily. Celesteela, Excadrill, and Skarmory get Flamethrower, while Thundurus, Therian, and Rotom Heat didn't want to take Salamence's stab Draco Meteor. The delights of spamming Hurricane aside, Salamence could also take advantage of its many switching opportunities to support its team further with Defog, especially with how it switched into many hazard setters like Tier King Cobalion, as well as the aforementioned Skarm and Excadrill. Regardless of the set it chose, Salamence was valued absolutely superb on all manner of teams, valued for its widespread utility both offensively and defensively, to be able to switch in against so many of the tier's common Pokemon and unleash such potent offense in return. The fact that it could do all of that immediately made it tremendous. If it was willing to trade in its offense, Salamence could really lean into the intimidating physical hit-taking with a defensive set that used the other reliable new Flying Stab it got in Gen 8, Dual Wing Beat. It basically took on an almost Landorus Therian style role, where it could at least pivot around pretty much every physical attacker, even if they had super effective hits. It was similarly bulky actually, and with Root's longevity, it could do this again and again, while also supporting the team with Defog. Dual Wing Beat wasn't just for defensive use either, it was the physical Flying Stab the Dragon Dancer had needed, and was similarly buffed by heavy duty boots, making setup even easier, as well as making revenge killing more difficult, though good old Life Orb was also an option to blast through sturdier checks, such as letting a Dragon Dance Dual Wing Beat pick up the KO on Primarina. More broadly though, Dragon Dance Mence had the talent of surprising a Chansey or Slowking switching in that expected the standard special attacker, which would lead to all sorts of trouble. Ultimately, the special attacker was so all-around consistent against everything that there's a reason it was the set that defined Salamence's place in UU, but it was also Salamence, so no matter what set it ran, it would be solid. And now we move on to the most power creep generation yet. That famous Gen 9 power creep saw Salamence drop all the way to RU, a sign of the times that it may have been, but at least Salamence got the dignity and pleasure of absolutely shattering RU. Terrestrialization on a Pokemon already as threatening as Salamence has a great deal of destructive potential, with Salamence delivered with the plum. Salamence started the generation as a fine UU Pokemon. In fact, at the very beginning, it was one of the best in the tier. Both the Dragon Dancer and the previous generation special attacker were strong once again, enjoying the ability to completely flip its weaknesses with Terra Steel, which was especially dangerous on the Dragon Dancer late game, while the special attacker once again loved intimidating what felt like everything in sight, and instantly tossed out big damage in return. Salamence's dominance didn't last as more Pokemon dropped into the tier though, especially with the DLCs that were to come. It was still a solid Pokemon, but no longer with such a large spread of advantageous matchups, and shortly after the release of the second DLC, the Indigo Disc, Salamence, long since facing severe UU competition to Tornado Styrian, found itself dropping to RU. The same sets Salamence ran in UU were even stronger with the lower power level of RU. There was immediate talk of banning it, but it actually settled into the tier surprisingly nicely, and after a while, wasn't even elite, just another strong RU Pokemon. Still, it was very strong, with both sets once again benefiting from how different the others' counters were. And that's before the Terror of Terra came in to thwart any tenuous check you try to throw at it. Among these were the Facade Dragon Dancers, which let Mence tear through even Galarian Weezing, which was otherwise pretty much as amazing an answer as you get, while letting Salamence turn burns from Pokemon like Volcanion into offensive firepower as well. And then Galarian Weezing rose to UU, which allowed Lum Outrage Dragon Dance Mence to party like it was Generation 4 or 5 all over again. It ripped through the tier with ease, and unlike in those old gens, you couldn't even safely revenge kill it with extreme speed thanks to Terra's Steel. It took surprisingly long, but Salamence was finally banned from RU. What a strange sentence. Here's another. Tornado Styrian rose to OU. Mence also regained the more solid overall niche in UU. It's not a world beater, but it's still a solid Pokemon. Now we have one more thing to cover. Another version of Salamence. And no, not Mega Salamence, but a relative from the ancient past, Roaring Moon. Roaring Moon was instantly recognized as one of the most powerful threats in early Gen 9 OU, playing as a strange cross between Mega Mence's stats and Hydreigon's typing. Dragon Dark instead of Mence's Dragon Flying. Its secondary stab is now also walled by Fairy type, but just as that didn't stop Pokemon like Hydreigon and Como-O in the past, nor would it stop Roaring Moon and its tremendous stats. Base 119 speed was excellent and put it ahead of even Iron Valiant, while base 139 sat right ahead of Salamence. Its defense was lowered, but its HP got a nice buff, and what's more, so did its special defense. So in addition to its lack of Stealth Rock weakness, it wasn't going to be easy to take out in return, especially because its move pool, in addition to the usual Dragon Dance antics, had several superb new tools, most notably the Wall Stifling Taunt and the Momentum Grabbing U-Turn, the latter of which lent itself to a powerful Choice Band set. Banded variants were excellent on Sun teams where the weather would activate photosynthesis, but generally, Roaring Moon's forte was Dragon Dance, and it's what it most relied on as it established itself as a top-tier sweeper throughout early Scarlet and Violet. With the booster energy it used to activate photosynthesis, it would be rid of its item, and thus it was able to unleash a full-powered acrobatics, which let it crush that staple of OU, Great Tusk. And this was bolstered further by Roaring Moon going Terra Flying to flip its fighting weakness into a resist, while turning its Dragon and Quadruple Fairy weaknesses into neutralities. Plus, with photosynthesis boosting its higher attack stat, Roaring Moon would have its attack doubled after a single Dragon Dance. It was especially frightening early on with Shed Tail support, as it was on the short list of things you most don't want to receive a free substitute. But eventually, Shed Tail was banned, and Roaring Moon started slipping in usage. It even dropped to UU right before the release of the Teal Mask DLC. It didn't have time to get comfy in UU though, as the Teal Mask brought it, well, roaring back to OU. Roaring Moon had previously wielded Crunch for Dark Stab, but now it had the far superior Knockoff, both stronger and with greater utility for the removal of opposing items. The latter especially valuable for removing the litany of heavy-duty boots that the metagame was relying on as hazard control in lieu of being able to remove hazards in the world of Goldango. Roaring Moon really took off, mowing through much of the metagame with ease. Even if you could take its hits with a bulky wall, it'd likely be able to make its way through you anyway thanks to Taunt shutting down your utility moves. It wasn't long into the new metagame before Roaring Moon was put up for a suspect test and indeed got banned from OU. Then the Indigo Disc came around, and with the influx of new Pokemon, Roaring Moon returned. It was once again controversially powerful, but despite many discussions on the subject, it wasn't broken yet. It hovered over the precipice for quite some time, thriving as one of OU's preeminent sweepers, occasionally driving someone berserk when it pulled off a particularly vicious sweep. Still, the metagame increasingly going in more defensive directions made it tougher for Roaring Moon to muscle through everything as it had previously, and yet it eventually found itself the subject of another suspect test. Turns out, once Roaring Moon started experimenting and going beyond its more standard Dragon Dance sets, it was even more devastating than had previously been thought. Terra Fairy Terra Blast Roaring Moon was similarly affected to acrobatics and smashing through Great Tusk, Iron Valiant, and Zamazenta, while also picking up the major benefit of plowing through Ting Lu. However, Roaring Moon didn't even need Terra Blast. Simply going Terra Fairy for defensive purposes was enough against the fighters that it faced off against. While Fairy was the most renowned, it was far from the only effective Terra Roaring Moon could pull out. Terra Ground not only blessed it with a similarly robust defensive typing, it also gifted its Stab Earthquake that trashed Clefable. Ghost Terra Blast crushed Corviknight and Air Balloon Goldango while making it fighting immune. Water Terra Blast utterly crushed Landorus Styrian's attempts to intimidate it while also dousing Great Tusk and ridding it of its weaknesses. Good old Terra Flying was always an option as well. Really, Roaring Moon could Terra its way through just about whatever it wanted. Fire to lose the weaknesses, break through Corviknight and Goldango, and become burn immune. Not only did playing Guess the Terra prove particularly lethal against a Pokemon so instantly capable capable of running away with the game, Roaring Moon was also making itself harder to take on by running less speed investment in favor of greater bulk. Not only was its natural speed more than sufficient to not need maximum investment, but the extra made revenge killing it far more challenging than its defensive stats would suggest. It can now grab that second Dragon Dance and really call game over on the spot. As a result, the ever-continuous Roaring Moon went to be voted on once again, and once again it was banned. 2 bans from OU in the same generation. Roaring Moon had actually started off decently in Ubers, enjoying the fact that it could reliably get its photosynthesis boost from Koraidon Sun, but it wasn't quite so strong by the tier's absurd standards, so it always was a rather niche Pokemon that eventually fell off from being usable at all. Still, no matter, Roaring Moon had an incredible debut generation, rating as among the best of the Paradox Pokemon and contributing greatly to Salamence's incredible overall competitive legacy. With the arrival of Gen 9, high expectations were set upon Salamence once more, as it had a track record of performing phenomenally in restricted formats. To make things better, Salamence could also utilize Terastallization in order to leverage its characteristic defensive utility with Intimidate by dodging would-be super effective moves. Salamence also had acquired actual flying stabs to play with in the form of Hurricane and Dual Wing Beat now. The stars seemed to line up for Mence once more, but the Gen 9 metagame proved to be too fast and violent for regular Salamence, even with many Pokemon being restricted in Regulations A and B. Although its presence was quite popular, its conversion rate into was not the best, only managing place within the top 8 of an event 3 times, with Justin Tang placing 8th at the Toronto Regionals, Eric Rios placing 3rd at Jadonks, and Alberto Boss placing 5th at Stuttgart. Salamence continued to employ its characteristic special attacking set, which used Hurricane and Draco Meteor to great effect, while also having the utility option of Tailwind available, while some players tried to use physical Dragon Dance variants here and there, and even defensive variants that used Rocky Helmet appeared here and there. None of Mence's fortes were enough to make regular Salamence succeed. Regular Mence wasn't great this time around, and Mega Mence was gone, but the power of manifestation that Bagon harnessed its entire life conjured up a prehistoric form that would put any astrology devotee to shame. Meet Roaring Moon. Roaring Moon was a darker, edgier, and more primeval version of Salamence that traded its characteristics Flying Stab for Dark Stab. Roaring Moon also traded Salamence's bulk for considerably more speed and power, getting rid of Salamence's trademark Intimidate to utilize the explosive photosynthesis stat boost to great effect, triggering its ability via booster energy, allowing Roaring Moon to shred anything in its path to smithereens using Terra Flying Acrobatics, the best flying move to ever do it, and Throat Chop initially. Roaring Moon only got better with time, just like Wine and the soundtrack to Tarzan, and acquired the deadly knockoff with the DLC. Roaring Moon enjoyed incredible success in competitive play, and its results were once again stellar. In a surprising turn of events, Game Freak released Regulation D right before Worlds 2023, shifting the paradigm of the format by introducing several new threats like Hisuian forms and Urshifu, alongside a bevy of legendary Pokemon like Landorus T that made Roaring Moon's life a living hell, making its highest placing at 11th at Worlds in the hands of Marco Hemantha Caladura Silva. VGC 2024 was quite similar to the previous year with its shifting regulations. Both Salamence and Roaring Moon enjoyed great success and countless placings throughout the non-restricted regulations, and continued using the same tried and true sets that had yielded results in years prior. Roaring Moon players, however, started leaning more into its defensive capabilities and utilized a combination of defensive Terra types like Poison and Fairy in order to combat its fighting weakness. This new defensive Roaring Moon utilized a combination of Breaking Swipe, Tailwind, and Knockoff in order to support its teammates using its superb speed and bulk. This new spin on Roaring Moon allowed it to thrive even with the presence of Urshifu and many of the Pokemon introduced in Regulation D. Here are all of their top 8 placements. Once Regulation G dropped and introduced all the restricted legendaries, Roaring Moon's popularity and effectiveness waned while Salamence practically disappeared. Roaring Moon players opted for a speedier variant of the Pokemon that utilized Tailwind as early as possible in order to aid Kyogre's Origin Pulse or Caloric Shadow's Astral Barrage. This strategy aimed to turn the PvP aspect of Pokemon into a single-player experience by wiping out the opposition in 2 to 3 turns. Oliver Escalin managed to place 14th at the World Championships in 2024, utilizing the Tailwind Pulse strategy supported by the classic Urshifu Rapid Strike, Rillaboom, and Incineroar Shell, and Amoonguss for potential redirection. The rotating regulations once again had similar results for both Salamence and Roaring Moon. Salamence even managed to get one top 8 placing piloted by Brandon Davis at Monterey Regionals, who used a physically offensive Tailwind variant with Lumberry in order to ensure that Tailwind went off as a secondary mode in an Ursaluna Armarouge Trick Room strategy. Roaring Moon continued using its offensive Tailwind variant to great success in formats with restricted Pokemon, and used a combination of offensive Tailwind and defensive Breaking Swipe Tailwind sets in order to rack up victories again. Not much changed, but the evolution of its Terra typing from Poison to Fairy to Poison, and even sometimes Flying in defensive variants as the passage of time flows is quite interesting. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Here are some of its placings. Roaring Moon again put up prime LeBron numbers and won a massive amount of events, but had a disappointing world season, with its highest placing being a 29th place finish on Brian Collins' team. And now, as we move into 2026, Roaring Moon continues its excellence, with its most notable placements being Carrie D. Ortona and Jack Clark with a 1st and 3rd place respectively at the Toronto Regionals. The Salamence and Roaring Moon line of Pokemon has had a stellar history in competitive Pokemon, consistently being one of the go-to options in most metagames, and only really falling short in the hands of insane power creep. It is a true test to the Pokemon's greatness that players are surprised when it's not winning. And now we can answer the question, how great were Salamence and Roaring Moon actually? Put simply, they were among the greatest competitive Pokemon ever. Salamence was a dominant OU force in its first 3 generations, even getting banned for its hyper-destructive sophomore season, then went on to dominate UU for the next several generations. But in the 6th and 7th, its Mega came around and utterly crushed OU like little else could, getting banned instantly and going on to dominate Uber so much, its Mega was a VGC superstar as well, completely dominating and shaping the metagame around it. Even the Aerolite nerf in Gen 7 barely slowed it down. Continuing in this dominant tradition was the quasi-Mega Mets Gen 9's Roaring Moon, which so resoundingly pulverized OU that it got banned twice, while also thriving in the VGC scene. All in all, Salamence's competitive history, in its various forms, has always been one of excellence wherever it landed. And thank you so much to our Platinum patrons. Thank you to Amphozenus, Alex Sable, Anthony Belval Renault, Daniel Isbeast, Corman, Eric Dissing, Funky, Glitcherton, Howl, Jack G, King Yabber, Nightfall, Megamon VGC, Mojo Game Slayer, Nurse Jake, One Penguin to Rule, Pretzel SP, Seagulls Incorporated, Sojiro Sakura, Spavoon, Gylaria, Soras and Croxon, Shiwei Miji, Stoneface Colin, Tyler, Kiboflu, Wardeen, Zathor for their major support of our videos.